Welcome everybody to From SVOD to Multidimensional Business Models. My name is Colin Dixon, founder and chief analyst at Endscreen Media. And I can't imagine a more important topic that we could be talking about today at the show. As Ian said in the introduction, the Earth moved about 3 months ago when Reed Hastings said that Netflix would add an advertising-supported tier, something that they said that they would never do. But it was a necessary move, I think, because all of the SVOD services now are being called upon to make money, and you really aren't going to optimize the revenue in your solution without multi-dimensional business models. That's our subject for this morning. We have a great panel of experts to discuss it. So without further ado, I would like to invite Gilles Domatini, who is CEO and founder of Clean. Gilles.
Thank you, Colin, for the introduction. And good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining early at IBC. For all of those of you who make it for the next 45 minutes, very happy to invite you at our booth to get a coffee, because I'm sure you definitely deserve a coffee in this early morning. In a few words, what do we do? Kling is subscriber retention management. We really specialized in optimizing how your subscribers continue to experience your platform over time. To give a few data points, we work with about 250 broadcasters worldwide. We have a small group of very large ones. Most recently, we've launched in the US with NFL Plus, and we manage all of our subscribers and customer care activities in the US. But you see others like Big Ten, also US-based, the CBC, and some more across the globe, Optus in Australia. So that's a definite broad coverage. As Colin said, nowadays everybody is very much focusing on the lifetime value of your users, and how do you optimize lifetime value? You increase engagement, you increase retention. Obviously, the better retention you have, the lower the cost of your marketing activities, the lower the customer acquisition cost that you can enjoy. So it's a very important metric that everybody should be looking at, and that's really what we focus on. There's been tremendous change happening in the last few years. Certainly, and I used to work for Apple, so I grew up, or my career at least grew up, with the transactional business and iTunes. Around 2015, Spotify, Netflix really started to change the transactional model, and they moved into the subscription model. And we see that a lot of what we knew as the way we worked evolved. We moved from transactional to subscription. The most important KPIs evolved from the original conversion to retention. And from all of this, basically the industry evolved from thinking about CRM into thinking about SRM, hence our positioning as Kling, as the SRM company. What makes us unique? Two main factors. One is that we have a very comprehensive set of operational tools, what typically in the industry you call subscriber management systems. So it helps you set up your offers, launch promo codes, prepare win-back campaigns, and this type of activities. We are able to operate merchant services, so billing and tax management, which in the US is very complex, as well as customer care. But we don't do customer care by having an army of people, to answer the phone or emails. We try to do this through machine learning models and optimization of how you handle the inquiries coming your way. The second component is analytics. I think we are the only platform that has a dedicated data lake to consolidate the various source of inputs that you can collect as you run your OTT service. It might be advertising related, might be authentication related, everything related to payment, obviously, customer care, QoE. All of this is fueled into the analytics system. We prepare the right models, the right segmentation, and then you can run your campaign. That's what makes us unique. I won't go through that all slides, but obviously we all speak about data, and I'm sure Colin will have some very smart questions to ask around that space. The big challenge with data is how do you best use this gigantic amount of data points that you collect. and it takes really time to normalize this data, package it in certain ways so that you can properly exploit it. This has been a long journey for us, and that's mostly what we try to show here. We started in 2017 to build this data lake approach, and throughout the last years, we've been really optimizing the machine learning models so to be able to predict at this moment at 92% the users which are likely to churn within your platform. So it's a very precise ability to define your churners. So in a nutshell, that's very much what Kling is doing, and I'm pleased after to answer any questions that may arise.
So before you dash off, Gilles, so you mentioned the data lake. There are many data pools that go to make up that data lake. Talk a little bit about all of the data that needs to come together to form the data lake which we need to make the informed decisions.
So in our perspective, Colin, what is very important is to look at the customer journey, because that's really where you understand the various silos of data that you may have inside your organization. Typically, at the beginning of the journey, it's the registration system, so typically Gigia and Cognito. That's a first data pool. Then you would get all the information around how people paid and what type of package and whether they upgrade, downgrade. So these are the Recurleys and well, the Kling, obviously, and a few other platforms. How do they pay? Through payment gateways, app stores. App stores very important. About 50% of all subscribers tend to be on app stores. Apple, Google, Roku, Amazon, typically. And then throughout their journey, they continue to generate a lot of data points. QoE data, customer care data.
Yep.
And ideally now with FAST, what we'd love to do is to integrate also some of the advertising dollar and to see how this advertising dollar can be mapped throughout that journey as well.
Right, right. And of course, all of that data is siloed, and that's why they need Clean, right, to pull it all together. Gilles, thank you very much. We'll be talking with you in a moment. And next up on our panel today is Ashley Horn. He is Technical Director of Simplestream. Ashley, the floor is yours.
Hi. So for those that don't know, Simplestream are a complete OTT solution. So we have a back-end CMS for which we run video workflows, encoding, transcoding, etc. And then we also have a front-end application platform. For this, we power a lot of customers globally, and they have a huge range of different monetization and different business models. So that can include anything from news, which we run in the UK, and that is predominantly advertising-based, to subscription services. We run a crafting service over in the US where you can buy individual classes for quilting. If anyone's interested in learning how to knit at the low, low price of $12.99. And we also run several fast channels as well. We integrate with HBB TV platforms. So we really work in a huge range of space within monetization and different business models to allow us to have a good expertise around exactly how best to go to market and how to adapt to the market that continues to work. So for today's session and the point of view from Simplestream is that the big subscription-only models are getting to the end of their time. Signing up for Netflix to be $8.99 and just having that be the end of it is no longer something that everyone can deal with. There are loads more services, and if you start paying for Amazon and Netflix and Disney, it becomes so much that the idea of cable cutting is the same cost that cable was, 5 years ago. So instead, from our point of view, it is diversifying and using the flexibility available to you to have different monetization and business models. So that may be that you're Netflix and you look at advertising. It may be that you are Amazon Prime and you look at having advertising, you look at having rentals, you look at having fast channels in your platforms, and you look at having subscriptions as well. And then you're also bundling, and then on top of that, you've got overlays with sports channels on that as well. There's a huge range of different diverse options, and ones that we've even started to work in as well are things like teleshopping and overlays, where there's no advertising, there's no subscription, but you can actually say, yeah, someone's wearing that jumper at the moment, and I'm interested in buying that. and I definitely want to go ahead and purchase it. So that's our feeling, is that there is a huge amount of flexibility that you can use to leverage every different type of customer, for which I'm sure you can use services such as Clean to identify all of those user groups and then say, yeah, these are the sorts of audience that we have, and we want to use that flexibility. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's short and sweet is what I wanted to get to the point.
So I had a quick question. You had up there client-side advertising and server-side advertising.
Yep.
What's the difference, and which one should I pick for which circumstance?
Yeah, sure. So it's a question that comes up a lot. Client-side advertising is something that we put either within the application or within the video player itself, and it allows it to be filled really easily. So you can have something like Google's ad server or something like SpotX or YoSpace, and you can have their SDK in their application, and then you can have an ad inventory onto that. Nice and easy. The issue with it tends to be that, especially on web, you have things like ad blockers, and it can be quite easy for ad blockers to locate that ad service and then remove it. For server-side ad insertion, we do that all within the server. So we're doing that before it even gets to the video player. And as such, that means that we can insert it into linear services. So what we tend to find is that for client-side ad insertion, we'll do that for VOD. And for server-side ad insertion, that goes into linear. It doesn't, however, mean that you lose any of that audience segmentation, because what you want with advertising is to be able to say, hey, these guys are within this target audience of group, I want to sell them some mattresses, and these guys, I want to sell them a BMW. So what we make sure is that when we're doing something like server-side ad insertion, which is a little bit more remote, instead what we're doing is sending all those parameters to our server, inserting it, and when it comes back to the player, it looks like the same linear stream, so you can't tell the difference from it, and it's very difficult for an ad blocker to be implemented in that case.
So which one should I use?
What have you got? If you've got a live stream, I absolutely would say go and use a server-side ad implementation. If you're using client-side, then what platforms do you want to be on? But in general, I'd say have a look at client-side ad insertion, and then if we have a few issues with ad blocking, maybe we can do server-side for some of those platforms. But if they're a closed network, you've not got to worry about it, and it's the fastest way to market.
Very good. Thank you, Ashley. We'll be talking about this, I'm sure, a lot more in a few minutes. Next up is Manish Sinha. He is VP and Business Head of OTT Solutions and Services for To The New. Manish.
Thank you, Colin. Good morning, everyone. I'll start with a quick introduction of the company, and then I'm going to talk about some of the perspective that we have as a company on the subject that we are talking about today, and what, as a company, we are doing about it. So To The New is a technology company with a strong expertise in OTT over the last 10 years. And we have built a solution called as Video Ready that is designed and architected to solve for 4 things. And that is experience, monetization, speed, and agility. And if you want to know more, we are just right across like next 3 booths. But coming back to the topic, let's start with what is the fundamental issue that the OTT businesses are facing from a monetization and a profitability perspective. What is the challenge and what is the need? The first one is that the OTT industry and the business models are still evolving, right? The best player that we have, like the best OTT platform, Netflix, they are also figuring out the business model. So if Netflix is still figuring out those business models, we could very well imagine that the OTT platforms across the world would be struggling with that. Then we have, while the business models are evolving, the industry is evolving, but there's a lot of investment that is going into OTT businesses. They need to invest in content, in technology, and a lot in marketing as well. So the cost is very, very high. Many OTT businesses are either not profitable, or if they are profitable also, it is not a very sustainable and a long-term business overall at this point in time. The idea is that we need to look beyond the current one-dimensional model, like talking only about an AVOD or an SVOD. We have to look to a more comprehensive and a multidimensional approach. That's the need. And the other need that is spoken very less in the industry, you will hear a lot of things around ARPU, average revenue per user, but nobody talks about the average cost per user. So that's an important matrix to be tracked as well. And we'll talk about that, what could be done for that specific issue. Now, just to give an example, and everybody knows that, but just to clarify the problem, like, for example, let's say you have a SVOD model, and you have 4 users. Everybody pays $10 a month, but for one particular user, the total watched hour, let's say, is 25 in a month. For somebody, it is 200 hours. For some, it may be like 600 hours, right? You don't want to have a user that pays $10, but their cost goes to $11 and $12, right? Because, and this cost, this is just a simple representation. But for example, if somebody watches more content, right, it adds to the CDN cost, the DRM licensing cost, the video analytics cost, right? All of that gets added, right? And then there is a transcoding cost that is, of course, not at a user level, but we want to focus on average cost per user as well to be profitable. So what's the approach? How can we build a more comprehensive and multi-dimensional approach to build a profitable OTT business? The first one is we have to offer choices to a heterogeneous customer base. The idea is that anybody coming to the platform, of course, from your target demographics, they should have something to watch. And the point that will be made by a lot of people, right, that like Jill also mentioned, Colin also mentioned, that there should be some content that will be behind the paywall, but there should be content that nobody is watching just lying there, right? Why not bring it and get some ads revenues from them? So there should be a different kind of a package, something for every user. There has to be free and premium content. There has to be subscription choices, right? It is one size doesn't fit all, so there has to be choices there. Custom subscription, it could be SVOD, rental, pay-per-view, TVOD, all of those hybrid models should be there. And finally, there could be like rewards linked to somebody watching a lot of content. For example, let's say there is a user who watches, let's say 200 hours, right? They can get some reward to watch a premium show without getting a subscription, right? Basically, you're encouraging them to watch more and more free content that gives you ad revenue. So that kind of an approach will help. The second point is buying the right content. There is most of the platform will have a lot of content that just lies there. Nobody watches it. It doesn't figure up in the recommendation, but there is a cost involved for that content, right? So it has to be the right content. The return on investment on the content has to go high, right? So you buy the right content looking at what are the current best performing content on the platform, what are the current target and potential audiences for the OTT platform, and finally the last one, what are the gaps in your content catalog? For example, you just have 2 shows, comedy shows that's doing really well, then you need to get more comedy, right? But that is not something that you can just identify looking at some dashboard and data. It has to be advanced analytics to reach that decision. The third one is making the content easily discoverable. So in the first point, you brought the people onto the platform and were able to convert them or able to make them watch more content. The second one was getting the right content that matches with your target audience. And now the third one is you have to make it discoverable to them. And how do you do that? Personalization is not the answer. It has to be a micro-personalization. It has to go beyond just the metadata and the title-based personalization, but it has to be hybrid recommendation approach. And it has to be measured. There has to be metrics like total watch hours and the total ratio of total watch hours to total time on the application, right? These are the kind of metrics that has to be looked at to arrive at a decision that this personalization is actually working, and that is lacking with many of the solutions that is available in the market and also with the OTT platforms. Finally, the last one is you should make more revenue when somebody watches more content. And that should be applicable even when it is a subscription model, right? The example I gave, somebody watching 600 hours paying $10 and having a cost of $11, for them, they should be watching more content that should be generating more revenues. An example would be that you have a dynamic product placement, right? So you don't put ads there, you don't increase the subscription pack cost, but you start product placement in the library content. And these are some of the things that I'm talking about we are doing as a part of monetization as a service. If you want to learn more, you can, of course, come to our booth and we can talk in detail about it. And then utilization of all the real estates that you have. It should be in a controlled manner and not like a Google display network, like you have any kind of an ads coming in. It should be controlled. It should be managed from the CMS. But there is a lot of real estate that can be leveraged for advertising without like sponsored pages, banners, without impacting the experience. So that's a quick summary. All of these 4 have to be done in tandem. And to achieve all of these 4 objectives, I think one very, very important aspect is a real advanced analytics at a much more aggregate level and not in silos. So for example, currently there is a subscription management analytics, there is a video analytics, there is app analytics, there is ad analytics, right? All of them are happening in silos. And on the basis of that, the content decisions, subscription pack decisions are being made. All these four data, all these four analytics have to come at an aggregate level. All this has to be linked together. And then analytics should report what kind of a packs has to be there, what kind of a content has to be bought, what kind of a placement has to be done, and what kind of advertising has to be done. So that's the model that we have thought about, and that's what TTN is solving, To The New is solving as part of its monetization as a service model.
Very good. So while I'm asking Manish's question, would you like to join us on the?
Sure.
Manish, so one of the things you mentioned was reward programs. This it's the first time I've heard it mentioned today. Tell us a little bit about reward programs and how they work.
Sure.
Take a seat.
So from a rewards perspective, again, the idea is that we shall encourage user to watch more content, to be more and more on the platform. That actually helps us with the monetization. So for example, let's say we have a lot of content behind the paywall and the user doesn't want to subscribe, right? But we give them the content enough so that they have time to spend on the content, they watch some content, and let's say they watch 200 hours and we say that if somebody watches 200 hours, they get to watch, let's say, House of Dragon, right? For example. So we are also not only earning ad revenues from them when they are watching the free content, but we are also giving them an entry into the subscription world so that they get a feel of the premium content and they get used to it. And there could be multiple models of that sort.
So there are two real benefits here. One is that they watch more advertising, so they generate more money. Two is that that you're upselling them potentially to a premium tier. Is there a third benefit? Does it generate loyalty in the program? Do they stick around longer?
Absolutely, it will. For example, somebody watches like for free, let's say season 1 of Game of Thrones, right?
Yep.
When the next season comes in, they will come back, right? And then they might buy.
Got it.
So they will get used to the content on the OTT platform. They will have better personalization because they have watched 100 hours of content. So that's how also they will be more engaged and they'll be more loyal.
Got it. One of the things that I think came up in a couple of the presentations was this idea that there's content sitting in the library that's really not doing very much for you. So I have two questions about that. Question one is, how do I identify that content? What should I be looking at? What metrics should I be looking at on the library to identify that content? Question one. Question two is, once I've identified it, what can I do with it without degrading its value in the library? So why don't we start with you first on how do I identify it?
So on the content side, first, in all fairness, we don't, as Kling, look very much at the content parameters.
Okay. So why don't we flip it? You talk about what should I be doing it? What new business models should I invest with it?
I think it's what certainly we think about is mapping properly what is the top tail versus the long tail. Whatever you look at, it's always very practical. So, of course, on our side, we look very much at the user and what, let's say, your top tail of your users, that's the high consumption user. So on one side, these guys have a high impact on your cost, but they have also high engagement, high ability, let's say, to promote your service. So these are your very loyal customers, these are your VIPs, and you certainly want to best nurture them and maximize, let's say, their exposure throughout, let's say, your community. Then you have the long tail. The long tail is to try to identify why are they not engaged. And a bit to your point about the content, Colin, why isn't this content relevant? If it's really not relevant, I fully agree with Manish's point, you'd rather get rid of it because it jams a little bit your search engines, it jams a little bit, all the analytics that you can have. So clean anything that is useless and concentrate on where do you generate value. I think that's...
Yeah. One of the things I love about what you just said was I think it is a mistake to assume that all customers are the same. being able to differentiate your most engaged customers is a selling opportunity, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, because these are really the promoters. You know, I think one of the key notions in e-commerce is net promoter score, and for many services. So identifying who are really the promoters of your service is absolutely critical, because then you can use this to also accelerate your marketing activities, which are extremely important, obviously, if you want to keep your costs down and at the same time generate higher awareness. So absolutely, I would say look at the NPS, look at the promoters and the VIPs.
Very good. Ashley, your CMS, how do I use your CMS to identify that dormant content?
Yeah, well, so I think it's a great question, and I think that the first point around the users is you don't know what you don't know, right? So it might be that there was a new a film came out, and it was apes versus monsters, and it was the most popular thing in February. But we're now 6 months beyond that. All of the users have changed over; they haven't seen it. So within the CMS, you're trying to identify content that has a really low play rate, even though that was maybe had a high play rate at the time that it was originally launched, and what that publish window is. So if you're a content owner, you have that publish window for 6 months. You probably want it to go out in, say, February, and then you want to drop it off, and then you want to refresh it again so it becomes quite popular again. What we're finding is that this is where fast channels have become into their own. So taking your VOD content and seeing it and saying, great, so I'm going to stick with my apes versus monsters because that's what I was watching this morning whilst doing some work, so very interesting. So that's dropped off. It's no longer available within that publishing window for VOD, but why not include it in a linear service? So I've got all of my different movies that haven't been as popular. I'm going to put them on in March, and I'm going to just play that out as a lean back experience. I can now watch it. It's a fast channel, so there's advertising for me, even if it was part of a subscription included in the first place. To your point earlier, it means that you're still re-engaging with that content. You're going to come back. Maybe your fast channel only has one episode of House of Dragon, but because I've now seen that one episode on the linear fast channel, I'm back and I'm re-engaged and I'm going to subscribe so I can see it as part of a normal VOD offering. So it's finding the content that is outside of publishing windows we tend to find has a low play rate, but a high opportunity to be re-engaged with, either as part of a series or as a standalone.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point. If you have a title that was well known for a while, but now is not being watched so much, putting it in a channel, it will be recognized and draw people into that channel, whereas it's not really doing anything for you in your library. That's a great point. I love that. So let's talk about hybrid SVOD, AVOD models. This is obviously de rigueur. Everybody wants to do this now. So is this a short-term solution to fight subscription fatigue and revenue losses for big players? What do you think, Manish?
So I think the hybrid model has to be a long-term thing.
Yep.
And the idea is because the consumers are going to be so heterogeneous always that somebody is comfortable that I'm on this platform to just watch Game of Thrones, right? So there should be a TVOD available to them. We should be able to have something that caters to that particular segment. Somebody will come and subscribe for an annual subscription. Somebody will do 6 months. Somebody will do pay-per-view. Somebody will do TVOD, right? So there has to be a package for everybody, but that has to be determined on the basis of the data analytics. For example, we spoke about the content that was a hit earlier, but now nobody knows about it, right? So, for example, let's say now because House of Dragon has come in, somebody who has not watched Game of Thrones, they might become interested now looking at the Game of Thrones. Now, can we say that we put Game of Thrones in a TVOD model, or let's say pay-per-view model, right? So it has to be hybrid and it has to be long-term because there will always be opportunity to cross-sell and upsell a TVOD and a pay-per-view and a AVOD subscriber to a SVOD subscriber. And it always has to be hybrid and a long-term thing.
Right.
And data-driven.
And actually, customers will probably love you for it because they have an opportunity to decide how they want to pay for that. Pay for that content. Gilles, one of the things that often puzzles me is how I benchmark my business. What should I be looking at? What should I be measuring in my business to decide how I'm doing?
So obviously on our side, we are very much e-commerce centric. So we look at many of the metrics which are associated with an e-commerce website. And to your point about hybrid and make the link to e-commerce. I think we like in the industry to think like, wow, there's something massive happening. It's so-called fast and advertising, and everybody's caught by surprise. But this is such a B2B notion, to be honest. The end user has always been hybrid. It was TV and web, right? That was the hybrid from a consumer standpoint. The only thing that we are now doing is to accept that actually the TV is a little bit gone. Most of the young generation don't consume TV. But also, a lot of people want to have the lean back attitude and not to try to think, I get to Netflix and I need to sort out, which series I want to start, but I already have 4 series which are started. So I just want to switch on and just enjoy it. And I don't want to pay necessarily for it. So from a consumer standpoint, let's say this hybrid model has always been there. Now, from a metric standpoint, is how do you integrate these metrics inside your online service? Because obviously this was done by TV broadcasters and they've been mastering these models of advertising for very long and they have all of this. But for the web, we don't have yet, let's say, a complete perspective on how people are using the free model. So whether it's entirely free or it's authenticated and then they get more targeted advertising, or then they upgrade into an SVOD package of some sort and they may upgrade even further. That's what you need to look at. And certainly what we all get back to is ARPU and lifetime value. So ARPU is when they start to look at advertising at some moment, but also at the moment they subscribe. But when we look at subscription, and it was certainly a weakness for those with subscription historically, we used to have hard moments, I would say. So you were a free user, you convert, you become a paid user. That was a hard moment. You stop paying, you are a churner. That was a hard moment. So we were very much into 0 and 1s type of situation. Now we realize that thanks to technology and the advertising, we are able to have like medium position, right? A churner that continues to engage with your platform for quite a while and generates $2, $3 or euros or pounds of revenue for some time remains a very loyal and good user that you should continue to pay attention to.
Yeah.
So the 0 and 1 notion is a bit gone. And
so just because they're not paying you, doesn't mean to say they're not still your customer.
Exactly.
One quick follow-up question. You mentioned that monthly churn was a horrifying 11%. And that the cost to win back or to win a customer is very high. Is the cost to win back a customer that was paying you much lower?
Absolutely. So from what we see, we recently published a white paper with one of our clients, CBC in Canada. We see that in average, we are able to win back about 36% of the churners on a paid subscription, right? So we are really talking about paid purely. So to win this 1/3, more or less, of its users is typically to target properly what are the triggers, are they price sensitive, are they more content sensitive, are they a bit more service sensitive? And once you've been able to model this, which is largely the analytics that we can provide, the machine learning that helps, identify these right triggers to create the right campaigns. So the cost almost is close to zero to operate this. It's cost of sending an email and generating the right report. So if you can win back 36% for a cost of zero, this is definitely a very strong ROI.
Yeah. Such an important concept, this idea that just because they're not paying you doesn't mean to say they're not your customer.
Absolutely.
Definitely something to keep in mind. Now, one of the I think we'd all agree that fast linear VOD to live represents a great opportunity to monetize customers, to build your funnel, to get people to come back to you, etc. But I'm an SVOD provider. I have no idea how to do this. Is it easy to create these live linear channels?
Yeah, certainly. So I think once you've got that content available, utilizing it for any of the monetization options that we've discussed here is what you want to keep on doing. And it's easy because it's already in that situation. Sending content out to be part of a VOD package versus sending it out to be part of a fast channel is the same process, and it's the same way and ease of it. The best thing to do is to have that content that you've already agreed that you're going to be part of that fast channel, and then look at where you want it to go. Because you want to reach the maximum audience possible. So do you want it in your own applications? Do you want a barker channel that you've got within your TV applications to have it at the top to say, this is what's constantly playing? And then on top of that, do I want to syndicate those live channels to the Samsung TV Plus, the Plutos of the world? Do I want to have a look at taking that VOD content and syndicating it not necessarily as linear, but as like an MRSS feed that I can then send to someone like Comcast? Reutilizing that content is a fantastic way of picking up more and more revenue from content that you've already got. You know, don't just take in the SVOD. As you've said, they're not subscribers anymore, they're users, and we are taking monetization options to them from different ways. And then all you've got to look at is, what does your advertising want to be? When it comes to the fast linear, it's always going to be server-side, because that's a lot easier. So you're taking each of your pieces of content, you're then doing an ad marker insertion, and you're sending that to your provider, or you're doing the ad marker insertion and the ad insertion at the same time to send a complete linear channel to anyone, and we're back in the world of linear broadcasting.
But one of the things that I've noticed about the fast linear channels is that the ad experience isn't quite up to TV quality. There are a lot of repeats. The ads sometimes come at odd places in the channel, in the stream, in the show that I'm watching. How do we make that experience of the linear channels that we're streaming more TV-like?
Yeah, so there's a couple of issues there, some of which are, will slowly be addressed, some of which are easier. So the first one is, you're absolutely right, sometimes you'll see a BMW advert 3 times, or you've seen a Mercedes and then a BMW advert. The way that gets improved is by sending more and more parameters when you're calling that live stream. And what I mean by that is, when we first started, it used to be, you would send your IP address, and based on whether or not you were in London or Berlin, you might get a different advert. Now it gets a lot more granular. So what we tend to see is most of our customers are integrating with CMP providers, which is consent management. And that allows you to sign off on things like GDPR and cookies, and also how much information I know about your browser. If you are signed up, if you aren't, can you send your email address, some of the previous content that you might have been watching? And we can then build a picture of you so that those adverts start to get better and better. You're not seeing the repeats. Instead, you're seeing content that is always new as part of those adverts, but also content that is targeted to you specifically as a segmentation group. The second point that you mentioned, of course, is whether or not the content, you get those odd break points in there. And that's all part of packaging that content when it comes out. So using the best information you have available to cut that content up. And again, when this was all started as a concept and it's now become really popular, it used to be things like, EPG data, and we're sort of take what was on the TX schedule and we're sort of carve out that little bit. And it works, but it creates these weird clips. What we're seeing now is we use something called Scuddy35, and that's a far more accurate way of taking content and either doing it through linear, and we're just inserting the ads using those Scuddy markers, or when we build up that fast channel from VOD to create linear, we're putting those in there as accurate as possible. So you get a really clean, really segmented channel, and you get it to be broadcast quality. And that's the dream, is to have BBC One and then your fast channel, and you can't tell the difference. Although I've just picked a example that doesn't have advertising in it, so there we go.
So then my last question for you is going to be for you to think about what are some of the things that are exciting you about monetization and multi-distribution coming up in the future that we can achieve in the future. That will be your last question, and I'll ask you to answer that in about 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Your response in 20 seconds or 30 seconds. So just be thinking of that while I ask Manish this question. Manish, you said something very interesting. You said micro-personalization. So I know what personalization is. I don't really understand what micro-personalization is and why it makes a big difference to the monetization. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. I think one thing that we need to realize is that majority of personalization that is currently happening, that is primarily based upon analytics. Everybody talks about AI, but there are most of the analytics solutions that are available, right? Very few are using AI in a real way. And also, whatever is being used on the AI and analytics side, they are relying on the content metadata. They're relying on simple algorithm like collaborative filtering, content filtering, right? But micro-personalization actually goes a level beyond, and it looks beyond the metadata of the content. It has to look at when somebody is watching a content, right? when it is dropping off, at what point it is dropping, right? So there has to be a temporal metadata aspect to it in terms of getting to know the user preferences and behavior. And the micro-personalization has to happen on the basis of those data points. For example, it cannot be, let's say, the top trending movies only, right? It has to be, let's say, top movies with a female protagonist, right? Or it could not be simply crime movies. It could be as deep as a bank heist-based crime movies, or bank heist could be the rail, right? So the idea is that we shall go beyond the comedies or the Oscar-winning or the top 10. It should be more personalized to me as a user, and that is what I call as micro-personalization. And micro-personalization will not only happen in terms of the content that I get, the rail that I get, but it should be in terms of the marketing that I get, the offers that I get, and the subscription packs that I get. So that's the level of it. It's going to the next double click on the mic.
So you would capture. So I might be watching a comedy, and in that comedy there is a particularly gory scene. For example, you said temporal,
Yep.
and you could maybe capture that a lot of people, when they get to that scene, they stop watching.
Absolutely.
So you could then use that to screen out content that has that sort of scene in it, and recommend them better content that matches and will keep them watching.
Spot on. Like, comedy is a genre, right? But within comedy, there are like 20, 30 types of comedies. You have sitcoms, you have dark comedies, you have different kind of comedies, right? So you're spot on. Like,
Yeah.
you need to know what within comedy somebody likes.
Because I have dropped off in movies for exactly that reason. Gilles, one quick question before we get to our final question. What are some of the red flags that providers should be looking for in their customer base when you're keeping an eye on what people are doing? What are some of the red flags that you should be looking for?
You mean red flags from a consumer standpoint or a platform standpoint?
Exactly.
I think certainly every parameters around engagement are very important. So frequency of visit, length of visit, these are very important KPIs to monitor. Activities associated with your customer care. So we look often at the percentage of contacts that reach customer care versus your total base. If you are below 1%, that's great on a monthly basis. If you're above 1%, you certainly need to figure out, how do you improve the quality of your service, because this is really something going wrong. Another metrics, and I was speaking with Ben Keane yesterday. I'm sure you know him very well.
Yes,
and
yes.
I was telling him about chargebacks in payments. And he was saying, what is chargeback? I was surprised that Ben didn't know much about chargebacks.
It's a very difficult issue, particularly if you don't charge very much for your service in the first place.
100%. So chargeback, for those who is when a client goes to his bank and says, I don't recognize that transaction, I want it reverted. A bank will charge you between $8 to $20 for that, let's say, reverse charge. On top of that, you get to refund. Normally, standards are around 0.4 to 0.6 chargeback. That's what you should aim for. If you are above 1, this is not good. If you are above 3, this is really killing your business.
Yep.
Slowly. It's like bleeding and you don't realize it, right? So it's very important that you pay attention to this type of metrics, because this is really what makes the difference between a profitable business and a losing business. So
Yep.
These are two examples, but there's certainly some more.
Very good. Yeah, chargebacks is something that I think a lot of people miss. So I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, so let's move to our last question. We've got a couple of minutes left, so 30, 40 seconds on this. We're going to start with you, Ashley. What are some of the really cool technologies or cool approaches that you're looking to bringing to your customers to help them make money?
This is all the fun stuff, right? So we've built out these linear channels now that we can take from VOD assets, and that's becoming more established. So now you're looking at what can you do with that. Pieces that we've been seeing are taking made linear channels out of VOD content and then also inserting a live event into it. And then on top of that, we've been working with companies that do teleshopping and e-commerce to create dynamic overlays on top of these linear channels. So we've got some really inventive ways of engaging users beyond the whole advertising or subscribing, and then putting that content in a way that they can engage with it and pay through to be able to buy whatever they want.
Sounds to me like they need to stop by your booth and check it out. Gilles, what do you think?
On our side, what we think is that one of the keywords during this IBC was about agility. And I think it's a time of reckoning for all of the providers that claim that they do SaaS and that claim that they have really a scalable model. I think many of the solutions have been built as a single tenant solution with massive setup fees, with very long lead times. And at the moment where you need agility, these guys will have big trouble. So we are super excited that we have a highly scalable platform, multi-tenant, no setup fees, because we think that's really what makes a big difference in the next coming 2 or 3 years.
And Manish, real quick, last word.
Sure. So as a company, we are focusing on this thing. And in fact, at IBC, we have launched something called as monetization as a service. And that monetization as a service covers all the aspects that I spoke about, like improving profitability, unit economics, focusing on unit economics, and data analytics as an aggregate level and not in silos.
Very good. Manish, Gilles, and Ashley, thank you for your wise words, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Colin.
Thank you, Colin.